Reading will be by Marty.
Good morning. Stonewall 50 years. Amazing. What Went Down by Tony Murata. In the wee hours of Saturday, June 28, 1969, a team of plainclothes police detectives raided the Stonewall Inn. The Stonewall was a gay bar located close to where Christopher Street meets 7th Avenue in Greenwich Village, New York City. Across the street from it stood a roughly sliver of triangular land named Christopher Park. After years of discrimination and harassment by police, the activists in the park began to taunt the police. Soon they were pelting them with coins, rocks, bottles, and bricks. When the stunned detectives retreated into the bar, the result outside was surprise and delight, followed by a surging sense of power at having challenged and intimidated long-feared authority figures. Emboldened protesters now swarmed across the street, crowded onto the sidewalk in front of the Stonewall, and bashed in its windows and doors. Police reports recorded this episode as a riot that lasted for 40 minutes. Exactly 1 year later, at the end of June in 1970, representatives of newly organized and mobilized subgroups came together to commemorate the Stonewall riots with a week of what were dubbed Pride events. Their climatic Sunday march and Gay-In were billed as the first birthday of gay liberation, and the designation stuck. We still celebrate Gay Pride in June and count the years since Stonewall. In just 1 year, these activists and community builders had founded new organizations, notably the Gay Liberation Front and the Gay Activist Alliance. Radical groups by today's standards, but the start of an institutionalized national GLBTQ rights movement. I am proud to say that the Unitarian Universalists were one of the first groups to welcome these organizations. The Gay Activist Alliance of Morris County, New Jersey, was founded in 1972, and to this day meets every Monday night at the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Morristown. We will now have a short video about the gay rights movement, and at the conclusion of the video, I will talk about two of the protesters that first night in 1969.
Why are we here? Why are gay people here? And what's happening?
I am not a stranger to the dark. Hide away, they say, 'cause we don't want your broken parts. I've learned to be ashamed of all my scars. Run away.
Your true legacy, the real work that you've done on the planet, will be teaching people
I
how
won't let them break me down to dust. I know that there's a place for us, for we are glorious. When the sharpest words wanna cut me down, I'm gonna sit in the blood, gonna drown
we have such a strong, fierce, united community that believes that ID and equality is our birthright. It's not a slogan.
I'm meant to be. This is me. Look out, 'cause here I come. And I'm marching
stand up for what they believe in, and that one action changes everything.
I'm not scared to be seen. I make no apologies. This is me.
Austin is too, and
drown 'em out. This is brave, this is bruised, this is who I'm meant to be, this is me.
And how we got there. For much of history, trans people and people of color have been excluded from both the gay rights and women's rights movements, in spite of the fact that they are often the most negatively impacted by gender and sexually based discrimination. Two trans women of color, however, refused to be left out of the fight for equality from the very beginning. Activists Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera were on the front lines of the fight for trans rights from as early as the 1960s, when the movement was just beginning to gain traction. Born in 1945 in New Jersey, Marsha P. Johnson was an outspoken African-American trans rights gay activist and drag queen during the late 20th century. Famous for her uniqueness, individuality, passion for equality, and compassion for others, Marsha was truly a one-of-a-kind woman. Whenever she was asked what the P in her name stood for, she famously replied, "Pay it no mind." Like the queen that she was, Marsha used the same reply when people pried about her gender or sexuality. Sylvia Rivera was born in New York City in 1951. She was of Venezuelan and Puerto Rican descent and worked as a trans rights, gay rights activist and drag queen around the same time. Rivera was orphaned at an early age, and after she began to wear makeup in the 4th grade, Sylvia was thrown out of her house by her grandmother at the young age of 11. At this point, Rivera began living on the street and working as a prostitute before she was adopted by the local drag queen community. These tremendous hardships could not crush Sylvia's incredible spirit and passion for the fight for equality, however. As the saying by Gina Carey goes, a strong woman looks a challenge dead in the eye and gives it a wink. Rivera and Johnson's paths crossed at the famous Stonewall riots in Greenwich Village neighborhood of Manhattan, New York City, which catalyzed the modern gay rights movement. At this point in 1969, the Stonewall Inn was one of the few places in the city that the gay community was able to commune without suffering harassment from the police and public shaming. Furthermore, the regular patrons of Stonewall were not the mainstream members of the gay community, white males, but rather the most marginalized members. The most common patrons at Stonewall were drag queens, transgender people, butch lesbians, male sex workers, and homeless youth. Most of these patrons also happened to be living in poverty by virtue of the fact that they were outcasts even in their own subculture. Many were also people of color, as at the time, much of the gay community tended to sideline members who were not white. Martha P. Johnson was celebrating her 25th birthday at Stonewall during the early morning hours of June 28, 1969, when the police began a raid of Stonewall under the guise of busting the establishment for selling liquor without a license. When the police began arresting and harassing gay patrons at the club that night, however, the gay community had had enough. Too many times establishments across the city where gay patrons congregated had been raided, and too many times gay patrons had suffered persecution by the police. At the time, it was standard procedure for police officers to lead women in the club to the bathroom to verify their sex and promptly arrest any cross-dressers among the crowd. According to eyewitness reports, the police also began sexually harassing lesbian patrons at the bar that night while they frisked them. At this point, a crowd of sympathizers had begun to gather outside the inn and they watched in horror as employees and drag queens alike were dragged outside and violently handled by the police before being shoved into police cars. Finally, when a police officer clubbed a butch lesbian named Stormy DeLaverie over the head for saying that her handcuffs were too tight, a violent riot broke out and the crowd exploded. They could no longer stand silently and watch members of their community be assaulted and unjustly imprisoned for their sexuality. Marsha P. Johnson was among the first of the patrons to resist the police that night, and Sylvia Rivera among the first in the crowd of onlookers to take action by throwing a bottle at her police oppressors. The riots they helped catalyze spread to surrounding neighborhoods until all of New York was in an uproar and continued on to last several nights. Their bravery, along with the others at the bar that night, led to the gay liberation movement. Martha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera serve as inspirational reminders that even when the world seems to be pitted against us, we still must find the strength and courage to stand for what is right. And now Julie will give personal experiences from our Interweave group.
Happy Pride Day, everyone. We've come a long way, but these situations faced by our Interweave members are stark reminders that many people are still fighting for equality. One member writes, "I have mostly been treated well, but there have been exceptions. I had a VA doctor from Africa that treated me badly enough that I had to ask for another doctor. That took many months. I recently found out that the men love this doctor, but the women do not. I had a court case that when it was found out that I liked to wear bras and panties from the opposing attorney, the judge used whiteout on the agreement to change it against me, and while I can't prove it, I have a strong suspicion that I lost my job due to said attorney, as the company I worked for was very eager for me to move here. I worked for them for 27 years and could no longer find employment after I was let go." Another member writes, "It was 1985 when I was in the emergency room at the hospital alone. Marty, my life partner, was in the waiting room, barred from coming back to be with me. He was not a relative. He had to call my sister to come to the hospital. Words matter, laws matter. We as a community had to work, protest, and yes, fight for our rights that most Americans took for granted." Another member writes, "In 1987, I was training employees in our Boston office. One of the employees said the manager of the office had told them I was gay and lived with another man. She stated further that the manager had told them that this wasn't right and she was going to report this to my manager and did. I came back to my office in New Jersey on Monday, not knowing if I would be fired. In 1987, there were no laws on the books to protect LGBTQ people in employment. In 1991, New Jersey passed a law banning discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations based on sexual orientation. In some other states, housing and employment discrimination against gays is still legal to this day." Another, "While on vacation in Arizona, Grand Canyon area, I ran out of film, found a touristy store, which was extremely crowded. Everyone was being waited on to the front, side, and back of me. I was dressed in typical tourist fare, except for a mannish-style straw hat to keep the sun off my Irish face. After everyone was gone from the store but me and the owner, he went back into the back of the store without saying anything, and I left and had to find somewhere else to buy film. I knew I was gay when I was 6 years old. I didn't have a word for it or know if other people were gay. I just knew I wanted to marry a woman. When I finally accepted my sexual orientation a week after my 19th birthday, I had been planning for a career in ministry for 3 years. I spoke with our family pastor and was told that I could go through seminary, but it wasn't likely that I'd be ordained, much less accepted as a pastor by any church. This was at the height of Anita Bryant and the moral majority uprising in 1981-82. Our congregation has always felt welcoming for Sue and I, but gay people know they are not welcome, accepted, or even tolerated by most congregations and feel the sting of estrangement from religion and God. Most anti-gay rhetoric is based on religious persecution. Religion has been at the forefront of homophobia and discrimination and continues to be a justification for anti-gay discrimination. This is why a rainbow flag is an essential form of outreach for every congregation calling itself a welcoming congregation. Now, Tony will talk about leaders from the gay liberation movement.
Good morning. Marty forgot to tell you that the Morris County Unitarian Universalist Church is where we met in 1983, and we just celebrated 36 years together. In September of, better put my glasses on. In September of 2018, Doris Kearns Goodwin released her new book on leadership in turbulent times. The book followed the lives of 4 American presidents. The key takeaway from the book is that leadership is something you grow into, not something you're born with. Each role model grew into their leadership role through adversity and intestinal fortitude. So it is with the leaders of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer movement. Last year, we mentioned at our service several noteworthy people. Today, we would like to talk about 2 of the leaders of that movement. In addition to the leaders, thousands and thousands of lesbian sisters helped during the AIDS crisis of the 80s and 90s, and we wish to acknowledge, although they were not individual leaders, collectively, they saved thousands of lives. Barbara Giddings is widely regarded as the mother of the LGBTQ civil rights movement. Although Giddings lived in Philadelphia, in 1958, she started the New York chapter of the Daughter of Bilitis. From 1963 to 1966, she was the editor of The Ladder, the first national lesbian magazine. With fellow organizer Frank Knitney, Giddings organized the first public demonstration for gay and lesbian equality. It was held in front of Independence Hall each year from 1965 to 1969 on the 4th of July. The size of the demonstration tripled from 1965 to 1969, from 40 people to 120 people. Giddings in 1970 threw her support to the first anniversary march in New York City to commemorate the Stonewall riots of 1969. This year we celebrate the 50th anniversary of Stonewall. This is celebrated in all cities and towns throughout the United States and in fact all of the world. Marty and I walked in our first parade in 1983 and walked in the 25th anniversary parade in 1994. We walked between the delegations of Israel and Italy. Giddings in 1973 was present when the American Psychiatric Association announced that homosexuality was no longer a mental disorder. All homosexuals were cured en masse on the same day by this announcement. Giddings had worked years to achieve this goal. Giddings also crusaded to promote gay and lesbian literature, and although not a librarian, she was awarded a lifetime membership in the American Library Association. Another leader of the LGBTQ movement was Harvey Milk. Harvey was born in New York in 1930. Harvey made history when he became one of the first openly gay officials in the United States. In 1977, he was elected to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. He was assassinated in 1978 along with the mayor of San Francisco. Interweave will show the movie Milk, which Sean Penn won the Academy Award for in 2009 at our next movie night. Milk was a strong spokesman for all lesbians and gays coming out of the closet to show families and employers that they all know someone lesbian or gay, and love is love no matter what. Sheila is going to talk to us about where we stand 50 years after Stonewall.
Hi, y'all. Sometimes I go back to where I came from. Not where I was born, but moved here from Alabama. Have we come far enough? No, not even close. It's better than it was, but New Jersey's special for many reasons. And many places in this country, you can be terminated for being part of the LGBTQ community, or they just don't like your looks, for real. And you say, I just don't like how you look, bye. And you're like, what? Now, was it really because you were gay, lesbian, trans, questioning, queer? Hard to say, but we're lucky to live here. Our members are being killed, run over, ostracized. There's been a spate of murders of late. At one time, many did not want black folks in the armed services. However, they were brought into the ranks and became mainstream, though not perfect yet. Gays were eventually allowed to serve openly. All the threats, kicking and screaming to no avail, faded away, though not perfect yet. I don't know how many of you are aware of the, what do you want to call that? Well, not independent, but a lot of the right-wing broadcasters had semi-famous people up saying that the moment the gay people were allowed in the Army, basically the world was coming to an end. Some of you might have noticed that it's still here. So, you know, and finally, trans folk were allowed to serve openly until now. Now, civil rights are being rescinded. Trans folk are no longer allowed to be recruited. And there is talk of letting those serving now go. Some say that the rest of our community are in the crosshairs. You might wonder why this might be a big deal, other than the obvious. Think about this. And one of my former occupations was long-range radar, among other things. Think about this. Consider the time and training that goes into many of the functions that the modern services require. Experts in nuclear weapons, use and storage, chemical and biological weapon detection and defense, long-range detection and interdiction, and on and on. Now here sits a person with years and years of training, some so hard that there is a backlog waiting to be filled. That person is charged watching and listening for a surprise attack by some deranged person, country, or whatever. And that person is told that they must leave the service. And sad to say, it's already happened, especially with translators. Oh, by the way, I put in a little plug. Interweave accepts straight people. There's been times when there's been more straight people than gay people. We don't care. Come on. But I'd like to leave you with this. We have, in some respects, come a long way. And in others, we are just beginning. You might wonder, why would somebody care if they see two women, two men, or whatever, kissing outside a restaurant? Why, you know, what would make somebody want to beat them up, kill them? A lot of people blame religion, especially those of the Christian faith, but yet, if you were to take Leviticus and open it up and go into all the other things, oh, you ate shrimp? Well, I'm sorry, you got to go. And on and on and on and on. I'll tell you a short story and then I'll be gone. It doesn't have that much to do with that, but it is and I'm not picking on this particular religion, but the person that told me was a doctor and love her to death. She's from Israel. She was on a plane going to Israel and from this country, and there's a young man nearby, and he's punching the button overhead to summon the flight attendant. The flight attendant comes down, says, "What's the matter?" He says, "I want to move my seat." She said, "But the plane is full. There might be one or two. What's the matter?" "Well, I'm sitting next to a woman." She goes, "Okay, why?" He said, "It might be that time for her." And his version is, you can't do that. That woman is unclean. You can't be anywhere near her. And that's in the straight world. Imagine what that's like for those that aren't.
Parents, love and listen to your children, for love is all there is. We'd like to extinguish the chalice. Let's. Oops, I'm sorry, Richard. I skipped something, sorry. Oops.
Some closing words. I've never been interested in being invisible and erased, from Laverne Cox. I became a lesbian because of women, because women are beautiful, strong, and compassionate. Rita Mae Brown. Burst down those closet doors once and for all and stand up and start to fight. Harvey Milk. I believe that telling our stories first to ourselves and then to one another and the world is a revolutionary act. Janet Mock. I learned compassion from being discriminated against. Every bad